Silverhawk. Seriously? The SEAL team leader didn't even try to hide the smirk when he read Chief Warrant Officer Sloan Kavanaugh's call sign on the mission roster. She was 29 years old, a helicopter pilot with 847 combat flight hours, and she'd earned that call sign after executing a zero-visibility extraction in a sandstorm that 3 male pilots had refused to attempt. The SEALs were used to working with experienced aviators who flew safe and followed protocol. Sloan had a reputation for flying into situations other pilots called impossible and bringing everyone home anyway. In 6 hours, when their extraction went catastrophically wrong and she was the only pilot willing to come back for them, the mocking would stop permanently. Chief Warrant Officer Sloan Kavanaugh sat in the pilot's briefing room at Bagram Airfield, reviewing weather reports and terrain maps for the night's mission. She was 29, compact and athletic with short dark hair and hands marked by small scars from years of working on aircraft. Her flight suit was worn but immaculate, name tape and unit patch faded from sun exposure. She flew UH-60 Blackhawks for the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. Her unit specialized in high-risk insertions and extractions for Special Operations Forces, SEALs, Rangers, Special Forces. They flew in conditions most pilots avoided, into landing zones most pilots wouldn't attempt, and they brought people home when conventional aviation said it couldn't be done. Sloan had been flying combat missions for 4 years across 2 deployments, 847 hours in hostile territory, 32 missions rated as high risk, 0 aircraft losses, 0 casualties among her passengers. If you're here for stories about pilots who flew when everyone else said it was impossible, subscribe now. These are the missions that don't make headlines but save lives. Sloan grew up in Montana, the granddaughter of a bush pilot who'd flown supplies to remote mining camps in Alaska during the 1970s. Her grandfather taught her that flying wasn't about perfect conditions. It was about reading weather, understanding aircraft limitations, and making decisions when the safe choice wasn't available. He took her up in his Cessna when she was 8. By 16, she had her private pilot's license. By 20, she'd logged 400 hours in small aircraft, most of it in mountain terrain where weather changed without warning, and landing strips were rough clearings, barely long enough for the plane. She joined the Army at 22 specifically to fly helicopters. Fixed wing was safer, more comfortable, better pay in civilian life. But helicopters could go places fixed wing couldn't. Tight valleys, small landing zones, places where people were trapped and needed someone willing to take the risk. Warrant officer candidate school and flight training were demanding but manageable. She was a natural pilot, instructors said, with instincts that couldn't be taught. She understood how aircraft responded before the instruments told her. She could feel changes in wind, turbulence, engine performance through the controls. The 160th SAW recruited her after her first deployment. They wanted pilots who could operate in degraded conditions, night flights, bad weather, hostile fire. Sloan qualified on her second attempt, one of 4 women in a class of 37. Her call sign came later, earned during a mission where she'd flown through a sandstorm to extract a team that would have died waiting for conditions to improve. The mission briefing was straightforward on paper. Insert a SEAL team into a compound in Wardak province, provide overwatch during their operation, extract them from the primary landing zone when complete. Flight time, 40 minutes each way. Expected duration on target, 90 minutes. Risk level, moderate. The SEAL team leader, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, was experienced and professional. He'd worked with the 160th before and understood how special operations aviation functioned. His team consisted of 8 operators, all veterans of multiple deployments. They reviewed the timeline, communication protocols, and contingency plans. Sloan introduced herself as the primary pilot. Hayes acknowledged her, checked his roster, and made a comment about her call sign that got a few laughs from his team. Silverhawk sounded like something from a movie, not a serious operator designation. Sloan didn't react. Call signs were often jokes or references that outsiders didn't understand. Hers came from a mission report that described her flying as moving through a storm like a silver hawk cutting through clouds. It stuck. Hayes asked about her experience level. She listed her flight hours, her mission count, her safety record. Hayes seemed satisfied. He asked about her contingency response time. if they needed emergency extraction. She said 12 minutes from alert, accounting for spin-up time and flight distance. Hayes said that was acceptable. The briefing ended. Sloan walked back to the flight line with her crew chief, Sergeant Mosley, a 34-year-old combat veteran who'd been maintaining Black Hawks for a decade. He'd heard the SEAL team's reaction to her call sign. He said they'd changed their tune once they saw her fly. Sloan said it didn't matter what they thought. The mission was what mattered. They pre-flighted the aircraft together, inspecting rotors, checking hydraulics, testing avionics. Everything was perfect. The helicopter was fully mission capable. They'd launch at 2100 hours for a 2140 insertion. Sloan sat in the cockpit an hour before launch, running through emergency procedures in her head. This was her routine before every mission, mentally rehearse failures and how to respond. Engine failure during takeoff, hydraulic loss in flight, taking fire during landing, navigation system failure. She visualized each scenario and her immediate actions. Her co-pilot for the mission, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Briggs, was older and more experienced, but comfortable letting Sloan run the flight. He'd flown with her enough to trust her judgment. He handled communications and systems management. She handled the actual flying. Briggs asked if the SEAL team's attitude bothered her. Sloan said no, and it was mostly true. She'd dealt with skepticism her entire career. Male pilots who thought she'd gotten positions through quotas, crew chiefs who double-checked her pre-flight inspections, ground commanders who requested different pilots when they saw her name on the roster. She'd stopped trying to change minds with words years ago. She changed them with performance. Fly the mission perfectly, bring everyone home, do it consistently enough that reputation replaced doubt. Her grandfather used to say that aircraft didn't care who was flying them. They responded to skill and decision-making. Gender didn't add or subtract lift. It didn't change weather or aircraft performance. If you were a good pilot, the results proved it. Sloan checked her watch. 40 minutes to launch. She started her final cockpit preparations. The insertion went smoothly. Sloan flew low and fast through the mountains, using night vision and terrain-following navigation. They reached the landing zone at exactly 2140 hours. The SEAL team fast roped to the ground in under 30 seconds. Sloan pulled pitch and departed immediately, moving to an orbit point 10 kilometers away where she'd wait for the extraction call. The SEAL operation lasted longer than planned. Instead of 90 minutes, they were on target for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Sloan held position, monitoring fuel, listening to radio traffic. The team had encountered more enemy fighters than expected, but was completing the objective. At 0023 hours, Lieutenant Commander Hayes called for extraction. Sloan acknowledged and began her approach. Then Hayes called again. Change of plans. The primary landing zone was compromised. Heavy enemy presence. They needed pickup from an alternate location 3 kilometers west. Sloan pulled up the coordinates. The alternate LZ was smaller, surrounded by trees on uneven terrain. It was technically usable but difficult, especially at night. She confirmed she could make it. Hayes said they were moving now, would reach the LZ in 8 minutes. Sloan arrived first and assessed the zone. It was worse than the map suggested. A small clearing maybe 50 feet across, trees on 3 sides, a slope that would make landing challenging. Manageable in daylight, dangerous at night. She'd have to come in steep, land on the slope and hold position while the team loaded. She set up for approach when Hayes called again. They were taking fire, 3 wounded. They needed immediate extraction, and they needed it from the only spot where they could defend their position. The difficult landing zone just became a hot landing zone. Sloan made the call. She was going in. Briggs warned that landing under fire violated multiple protocols. They should call for armed escort, wait for gunships to suppress the enemy, then extract. That was standard procedure. Sloan said the SEAL team had 3 wounded and was running out of ammunition. Standard procedure would get them killed. She was going in now. She brought the Black Hawk in fast and steep, descending at a rate that made the airframe shudder. Night vision showed muzzle flashes from multiple positions around the clearing. Rounds were hitting near the LZ. Sergeant Mosley called out ground fire, but Sloan was already committed to the landing. She flared hard, bleeding off speed, and touched down on the slope with the helicopter, tilted at an angle that pushed the aircraft to its limits. The landing was rough but controlled. Mosley was already on the ramp, covering the team's approach. The SEALs ran to the helicopter, carrying their wounded, returning fire as they moved. Hayes was the last one on. He shouted that they were taking heavy contact, needed to go now. Sloane didn't wait for confirmation that everyone was seated. She pulled power and lifted off, the Black Hawk struggling under the load and the slope. Rounds hit the fuselage. An alarm screamed in the cockpit. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Not critical yet, but it would be if they lost more. She pushed forward on the cyclic, accelerating away from the LZ, keeping the helicopter low to use terrain as cover. The hydraulic alarm continued. Mosley called damage reports. 2 hits to the fuselage, 1 to the tail boom. Hydraulics were degraded but functional. Sloane flew them out of the valley, climbing only when they had distance from the enemy. The helicopter was handling poorly but still flying. They made it back to Bagram at 01:47 hours. Sloane landed with failing hydraulics, feeling every vibration through the controls. The landing was harder than normal but safe. Maintenance crews swarmed the aircraft immediately, assessing the damage. 2 rounds had passed through the fuselage inches from the fuel tanks. Another had damaged a hydraulic line that would have failed completely within another 10 minutes of flight. Lieutenant Commander Hayes found Sloane in the debriefing room an hour later. His team was safe. The wounded were in surgery but expected to survive. He said he owed her an apology. His team had laughed at her call sign, made assumptions about her capabilities, and then watched her fly a mission that most pilots wouldn't have attempted. He said Silver Hawk wasn't a joke. It was accurate. She'd flown into a situation that should have been impossible, held position under fire, and gotten them out when the aircraft was taking damage. That took skill and courage most pilots didn't have. Sloane accepted the apology, but said it wasn't necessary. She'd done her job. That's what Night Stalker pilots did. Hayes shook his head. He said most pilots would have waited for better conditions or called for support. She'd made the decision to come in immediately, and that decision saved his team. 3 weeks later, Sloane received a formal commendation from Naval Special Warfare Command. The citation specifically mentioned her call sign, Silver Hawk. The name that had been mocked became the one everyone remembered.